I'm Heather Fleming, founder of In Purpose Educational Services and author of the book, My Black Friend Says.
And I'm Delaney Ray, the coordinator of the LEAP Institute. So what do we do now, Heather?
Same thing we've always done, Delaney. Keep fighting for an equitable world.
This time in a podcast.
Welcome to the Listen, Learn, Love podcast, where comfortable friends chat about uncomfortable topics.
Let's do it. So, Heather.
Yes, Delaney.
Guess who is with us today?
Who, Delaney?
Our amazing, magical, fix everything that we mess up and make it perfect virtual assistant, Katie Sesti.
It's Katie!
Hi, everybody.
Welcome, Katie.
Thanks. I'm happy to be here.
Welcome, and tell us what you do.
I am a, professional magician, but I am a virtual assistant. This year, I started my own company. It is called Sestiva. I support several different nonprofits or companies or individual people in their administrative needs. So I am working with Heather and Delaney with In Purpose Educational Services as their assistant. And I do lots of different things.
I've always felt that the title of administrative assistant for you was inadequate because, again, I remember one day that I sat for 30 minutes waiting for you to answer a question because I could not do anything else with my business until you answered it. Because we need you so much, Katie. So I just really feel like maybe we should just call you administrative goddess.
If you want, go with that.
That can be on your card.
Magician, but I think a goddess is even more powerful.
Yeah.
I'll take it. Yes.
Here's my question. Have you ever been called a goddess before?
No.
Really?
No.
Oh, so you definitely never been said, it's never been said that you are a European alabaster goddess of beauty and grace, or that you are a saucy little
No, I would be maybe
saucy little Irish, Slovakian. I'm not sure what.
I am German.
I wasn't sure what brand of white you were.
I'm not even remotely German. I am white. So,
well,
yes.
So you've never been called any of that?
I have received a derogatory term or two, but nothing, whatever. But mostly, no. I've only ever been called cute. So
cute.
That's so weird because I am called stuff like that all the time. A chocolate goddess, a beautiful amber queen, blah, 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 blah. How about you, Delaney?
For me, I would say the term I've heard most of my life is exotic. I've been called exotic. So what a great topic. Is that a compliment? Is calling a woman of color exotic a compliment?
I don't know. When people say something like that, you're such a gorgeous, exotic queen of blah, 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 whatever they say. I'm sitting there thinking to myself, I'm literally wearing a bonnet and some Hello Kitty onesie. I'm not sure how exotic I am right now.
Right.
I think that sometimes some of those compliments are connected to how they would like to view my entire race as opposed to
you as a person.
Me as a person. Right.
So that's really a good point. I think of two instances throughout my history that really stand out that I think explain this well. Exotic is something I have been called a lot, but there are two stories that I think really are kind of set apart. And one was my freshman year of college. I had gone to a party and there I met a guy, and I honestly don't even remember his name, but he was immediately taken with me, and he kind of made a big point to follow me around the party and talk to me. And he was cute. I was actually really kind of excited about it. And pretty soon he asked me if I was Native American, to which I said, I do have Native American ancestry. My great-great-grandfather, but that's pretty far back. I don't consider myself culturally Native American, but that's not what he heard. And so he kept referring back to me in his words as being a beautiful Indian princess. And everything I did, I had a braid in my hair, and he pointed out to somebody and said, "Look at this amazing Indian braid." And it was so uncomfortable and awkward. Like, I really thought he was interested in me, but it got so weird that was the end of that beautiful relationship.
That would be weird.
It was uncomfortable. I actually had a French braid in my hair, so it really didn't make any sense. The second one I would say that really got to me was later on, but still in college. I had met through friends of mine, a guy that asked me out on a date. I went out on a date with him. So first date, and he continually kept referring to one of his ex-girlfriends who was Latina. And he kept getting more and more explicit, explaining to me the things she liked to do in bed and what she did in bed.
Because you need to know. You need to know any of that.
Okay, so I was like, this is the world's worst first date conversation for starters.
Ever. Yuck.
But I think it took me a while to realize what he was doing was he was basically letting me know his expectations of me.
Mm-hmm.
You guys know me. You know that I have all the sensual prowess of like Patrick from SpongeBob. It's like Heather said, like the bonnet and the slippers. Like not only am I not going to accept that challenge, like I'm going to go home and I'm going to like bathe in Lysol. Like it was so gross.
Yeah.
Katie, you got to join us this morning for our meeting. And so you got to see what beauty queens we are.
Likewise, you got to see mine as well. So.
Every Tuesday and Thursday when we meet. Yeah, that is so awful. But that's something that Black, Indigenous, and women of color have to deal with, I think, on a regular basis, especially when, they begin dating outside of their race or whatever. It's called, what's the word, Delaney?
Fetishization of women of color.
There it is. Fetishization. Hey, Katie, you try to say it now.
Fetishization.
Oh, no. You say it fast.
Oh, no, you got to say it fast.
Fetishization.
Fetishization.
Oh, I'm so proud of you.
Yeah, fetishization.
I want to warn everyone that I'm going to mess it up. It's a pretty big word. I'm going to mess it up so many times during this conversation.
You're right. That is what it's called. And so I did actually a little bit of looking around online before we had this conversation. And going back to my question, is the term exotic a compliment? I found an article written by Lita Williams. The title of the article is Fetishization. Fetishizing people of color isn't a compliment, so don't act like it is. And I really liked this quote that I wanted to share. Calling a woman exotic because she isn't white isn't flattering in any way. It's objectifying. Racial fetishization isn't a compliment. The comments aren't out of admiration or adoration. It's racism.
Yeah.
What do you guys think of that? Especially kind of with the stories that I told. This really kind of hit home.
Yeah, I think it's part of the process of otherizing. And so it's setting, white skin as the standard, and anything outside of white skin is being somehow different and unique, when that's just not true in every situation. My experiences as a Black woman don't have to do with my skin actually being a different color. It has to do with how I'm treated because my skin is a different color, and the experiences that I have because my skin is a different color. But if we removed racism, if we removed that otherizing process, none of my experiences would be any different than either of yours, Katie or Delaney. So yeah, it's that process of otherizing. I don't care for it either. I've had some experiences where I was dating outside my race, and same thing. You just start noticing that there are certain things that person does that is like, that seems strange. And I'm not sure that they would do that if I were a white woman as opposed to a Black woman, and it includes the sexualization part, and the, thinking that there's going to be something different in our relationship that would not be in their relationship with a white woman, simply because of my skin color and not because of my experiences. And in that way, some of them add to those experiences as a result.
So, Katie, in your experience, have you heard or seen these terms or comments used with people, or especially women of color?
So I personally haven't really had anything like that, but from the outside looking in, have heard of situations like this, because I guess I've shown myself to be an ally and people can tell me these stories and I'm listening to them. And so growing up in St. Louis, grew up in a very white area, not a lot of diversity, with the exception of some students in school growing up. But as an adult, I realized that I was missing diversity in my life. And so I made an active choice to make friends and make relationships with people of color versus having a token Black friend or token Jewish friend or token Hispanic friend. It's just, I want to have friends that are different than me.
Right.
So just building relationships with people I work with and just talking to the people as people. So with that, there comes a point where you make friends of, in your quote unquote new world, your adult world, you have adult friendships, and you have, sometimes a party where you invite people from both worlds and they start interacting with each other, and that can lead to kind of some awkward moments. And so from what I had heard, what happened once was someone from my quote unquote old world was talking to someone from my quote unquote new world and was mentioning that her daughter was very exotic looking, and her daughter was 9. So
9 years old.
And she's Hispanic, Latino descent, but she's American. So it's not like she truly was exotic from the jungles of whatever country.
Right.
She's from Texas or something.
Yeah,
like
it's like what, Cleveland?
And so my friend told me about it, and I obviously apologized and listened to her about it, and and I tried to explain that person, but it was ultimately like, yeah, I'm aware that person said a very racist thing, and I apologize for it, and they are racist, and I apologize that you had to experience that. Instead of saying like, oh, they're a really nice person, that's not what they meant to say. It's like, no, that I kind of just took responsibility for it and apologized as best I could. So that's the only kind of interaction I've had with any of this fetishization of.
Almost
got it. But yeah, that was. But yeah, as a white woman, I really.
You know what? That's a great story.
From outside in. So.
The thing about that story that's so great is that is a child. That's a baby. That's a 9-year-old girl who is already being called exotic. So there's another article I found called A Dive into the Degrading World of Fetishization that Latinas Live in. And I think that really goes along with this. This article was written by Katie Sesti, and it was published in the Daily Orange. And she writes about the prevalence of the Latino as an archetype, as being the hot-tempered, curvy, and seductive woman. And that's just a caricature of a woman. That's an unrealistic stereotype, but that fuels this exotic fetish about Hispanic and Latino women. She goes on to explain that word, exotic, as I think Heather brought up earlier, all that word is doing is pointing out features that fall outside of the social norm. But of course, that norm is by default white. And so when a person, especially a white person, says these things, this just continues to perpetuate the idea that white culture is normal. White features are normal. A white woman is the normal, beautiful woman.
Mm-hmm.
I really liked, too, the point about the fact that, this was a child, because believe it or not, this process begins in children. Research finds that by the time Black children, especially Black girls, are 5 years old, people begin to see them differently, less innocent, as being less innocent, more manipulative, et cetera, et cetera. And that's based upon our implicit bias and what we're taught about Black women in general. And it's put off on children. My daughter she's 12 years old. She's tall. She's beautiful. She's still 12. Even though she may look like a woman, she's still 12, and she's still
a baby, a 12-year-old.
She's still a baby.
Child.
And so for me as a Black mother, part of my job has been shielding her innocence for as long as I could. There have been events that have broken it. Like I talk about the fact that the first time she was called the N-word was in 5th grade. She managed to make it 3 years longer than I did, because the first time I was called in was in 2nd grade. So you have these experiences that you try to shield your children from. as much as possible, but society, unfortunately, it sometimes comes to them. And that's one of the ways that they find. That's the reason why when we see reports about Black children and discipline within schools, more often than not, Black children are more harshly punished and they are more often pointed out for punishment. And it's because of some of these implicit biases that we get from the otherization, fetishized. I give up. Katie, say it.
Fetishization. That's the best
there
I can do, guys.
I think we are going to have to just break that down into being like a really
Fetish.
long.
I mean, that's how I explain words to my son. So,
Fetishization. I love it.
Fetishization process. Okay, we got that.
Heather, do you know how far back in history this hypersexualization of Black women actually goes? You probably do. Katie, do you know? I didn't really know because I kind of looked into it. I did a little more research. And it turns out that there's a historical context of this racial fetishization of women of color all the way back to the writings of Thomas Jefferson. And I'm sure before then.
Yeah.
But I was reading an article by Karen M. Holmes. It was published in the journal Black and Gold. And the title was The Colonial Roots of Fetishization of Black Women. And in there, she writes about a very influential political document of its time that was written by Jefferson. So this was in 1788. In this article, he wrote that Black men are more ardent after their female, but seems with them that they have more eager desire and less of a tender, delicate mixture of sentiment and sensation. And that is a really vile claim, I think, to make about a race of people. But he doesn't stop there because he goes on to depict Black people in general as primitive and emotionally immature in regards to sexual intimacy, and expresses the idea that Black women are hypersexualized, but also have no real discrimination or concern as to their sexual partners. And what this did was this paved the way through this document for this rape culture that existed throughout the history of slavery in America. So here is actual historical documented precedent behind these experiences and this conversation and what, Heather, you have been talking about with your precious child. I mean, this was written into documents by our founding fathers. This historical
written
systemic
into our country.
Yes, this systemic debasement and dehumanization of hypersexualizing women of color. And it has persisted from slavery all the way through modern times.
And it was written by someone who had 6 children with his Black slave. And so when they call Sally Hemings his mistress, I always am like, no. She was his victim.
Right. Probably not mistress. And
probably not mistress, probably victim. And so, and the shame of it, Sally Hemings was the result of his wife's father and a slave woman. So basically, Sally Hemings was Jefferson's wife's sister. But she was enslaved. She was enslaved. And I'll say this, that actually Jefferson's document was kind of a culmination of things that presented up until then. Ibram X. Kendi discusses it in Stamped from the Beginning, that kind of this idea started with a woman named Elizabeth Key. And so she was a biracial woman. Her father was a white man. And when he died, he actually freed her. But the people that were then in charge were like, no, we're not. And so she ended up marrying another white man. She became a Christian, and then she and her husband went into court and they sued for her freedom, basically, because they were like, according to British laws, number one, it's carried on that idea of freedom is carried according to the father's race, which in that case was white. And then number two, it says you can't enslave fellow Christians. And so America, in order to keep this institution of slavery in place in the way that they needed to, changed all those laws. And they made it to where it was based on, I think it was a Roman concept of basically when there's a domesticated animal, and that's what we were being compared to. When there's a domesticated animal, it is based upon the mother And so they changed the laws based upon that particular concept so that they could keep people enslaved.
Of course they did.
And
right?
yeah. And then after
gross.
that, it kind of kept building because now white men had permission and could freely have sex with their slaves, produce a child, and that child would actually make them more money because that child would now be a slave because it's based upon the mother's roots. But in order to justify their attraction to these so-called animals, they went through this process of hypersexualizing us and basically saying that they couldn't resist the way that we pulled them to, drew them to us, etc. So we became the victim. We became the cause of our own victimization. And whenever we look at some concept, some stereotype in history, we always have to look back to and follow the money, if we're going to be honest. The sexualization, the hypersexualization of Black men and Black women came from the fact that they needed to justify slavery. They needed to justify slavery so that they can keep free labor. They needed to keep free labor so that they could make money. And so that's also where the idea of this aggressive Black male that is just obsessed with white women to the point that white women's virtue has to be protected, that also came from that particular history. So even before Jefferson's lovely little writings, there was a book called The Isle of Pines. And it was about this man that was shipwrecked with 2 white servants and 1 slave woman, and then 1 14-year-old white servant. And basically the man starts engaging in sexual relations with the other women, the white women on the island. And then he portrays the Black slave woman as wanting to be part of this and wanting to have sex with him so badly that she overtook him. She attacked him in his sleep, etc. And so that's another treatise that helped to contribute to this idea that Black women were these hypersexual beings and that we were indiscriminate about who we chose to have sexual relations with. And unfortunately, it has continued throughout time. And that is the reason why we find some of that data that we find on implicit bias within our schools and the fact that Black children are seen as older and less innocent than white children of the same age.
Right. Mm-hmm. That's amazing history. And it goes along with what you've said before about, follow the money sometimes to find out why a policy or a system is in place. It sounds to me like Thomas Jefferson was just kind of doubling down on this belief that really benefited, the white slave owners.
It did. It certainly did. And I mean, it got to the point where there was a survey of newspapers in what year was that? 1776. And in that year, they had reported 100 rapes.
Yeesh.
But they never reported the rapes of Black women.
Wow. Wow.
And that's because at that point, they had normalized that. And they had made it about the fact that if a Black woman is raped, it's because she wanted it.
Didn't count. It just doesn't count.
Right. And it didn't count.
And unfortunately, we still see the remnants of that in our modern culture.
Totally.
And that's the reckoning when we start talking about how to better love one another and to better serve one another and to come into community with one another. That's some of the things that we have to reckon with. We have to reckon with the fact that this is this history and we've got to work through how do we make this better, Right.
So I guess here is a big question. I'm going to ask you, both of you, Katie and Heather. So after this, all of this discussion, the historical context, does this mean that a person can't be attracted to or date or love someone outside of their race and ethnicity?
Well,
absolutely not.
I was going to say, I love you guys. And, and we are very different people. But I don't love you because of, I love you people who happen to have other, backgrounds than me and look different in different cultures. But that's not why I'm friends with you. So I think it would be kind of like, what's the point of that relationship? What are you trying to get out of it? And for me, I'm trying to just get friendship and, so.
Yeah, and I think that's the key difference is your attraction based on fantasy or reality. Are you attracted to the racial caricature of a person, or are you genuinely attracted to that person?
Yes, I think that is a really significant distinction. In the end, last episode about interracial friendships, I talked about the fact that my best friend would never describe me as her Black best friend, because I'm her best friend who happens to be Black. The first thing that we have is the fact that we're best friends. And what makes us best friends is actually those things that we have in common, those things that connect us. And then as a result of that, we examine, we know about, and we appreciate those things that make us different. Mm-hmm. And I think that ends up being the key, is that, like for instance, I have a cousin, he's married to a white woman, and I could not love her more. But the reason why is because of the fact that she's authentically herself. Like, she's not one of those people that comes in and tries to so-called act Black or anything. Right. She is just herself. And in being herself, that's the beauty in her being with my cousin, because they are in a lot of ways polar opposites, very polar opposites, but they care about and they love one another for who they are. And then they accept one another for who they are. That's what's important in relationships of any type. And I'm talking about interracial romantic relationships or interracial platonic relationships. It's about that appreciation point.
Right. And that's one thing I've had in friendships and kind of part of the first story that I told you guys is when people expect you to act out your race, when they want to point out any time that you are doing something that is stereotypical for your particular ethnicity. My husband, who is just Caucasian, he's super white. He does not ever expect or ask me to act out my Hispanicness. That's not something that it comes up in conversation. Well, I mean, obviously it comes up naturally at certain times in our lives and in our family, but it's not something that's pointed out or expected of me.
Mm-hmm.
That's really significant. The friend group that I have, which of course you two are a part of, the friend group that I have, that's just kind of how it is. I am who I am. When I get onto our calls, I could be wearing my bonnet. There's been times when I've been doing my hair, a new hairstyle, etc. And y'all just accept me as I am. You might have a question because it's different, but it's not one of those things where now we need to know, oh, Heather, you just look so exotic. You'll tell me I look pretty, but thank goodness. Let me point this out. It bothers me too when that people always talk about my skin color from a perspective of food. Like, what is up with that?
I'm going to eat you.
Yeah, tell us more.
I'm chocolate, I'm caramel, I'm almond.
Okay.
No, I'm not food. Stop that. You can describe me as medium skin or whatever, but no, don't. Oh, she's coffee colored. What?
Katie, do you get that? Are you ever described as food-like?
No, but I did notice the crayon my son wanted to use for skin said apricot. So that would be the closest we've got to apricot. But
I would love to see one called boiled egg.
Boiled egg. That would probably also
see how well that goes
over. That's that would work for me, I think. But yeah. How about mashed potatoes? I like mashed potatoes.
Okay, with butter mashed potatoes.
But are these also going to be scented crayons? Because I don't really want to use boiled egg. I mean, I could go for a good taco crayon, and I might even be willing to
eat that taco crayon.
Yeah, I might. That might.
Again, with I want to eat your skin color. I just want to eat it.
Oh, y'all are the best. No, by all means engage in interracial friendships and relationships, but it's about really finding that ability to see that person first as an individual. One of the things that Ibram X. Kendi also talked about, and a tradition we still continue, is that white people have the opportunity to be individualistic. And so if a white person engages in negative behavior, that is a representative of that white person. That's the reason why headlines say things like he was a lone wolf, he was mentally ill, et cetera, et cetera. But when it comes to Black people, and this started way back then with this fetishization, I said it right, with this fetishization issue, that Black people, when a Black person engaged in negative behavior, it started to become representative of the entire Black race. And so it just comes down to, no matter what the issue is, we've got to do a better job of learning how to treat people as individuals and then respect them, love them, listen to their experiences because they are a member of a specific identity group. But the first thing to start from is the individual and loving that person as an individual.
I think that's the perfect note to end on. But before we go, I really want to hear us all say that word 3 times fast.
At the same time?
Yes.
Fetishization. Oh, that was a mess, y'all.
Thank you so much, Katie, for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Love you all.
Love you guys too.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode. You can support us on Patreon by looking for the Listen, Learn, Love podcast, or follow us on Facebook and Instagram at InPurposeES. That is INPurposeES. You can also follow us on Twitter at InPurposeEA, or visit our website at www.inpurposeea.com.
Heather, this was great. Do you want to do it again next week?
I sure do, Delaney.
Awesome. Talk to you then.
Bye.